So, imagine waking up on a deeply hostile, uncharted planet. Like, the sky above you is entirely blocked out by this permanent eclipse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it basically plunges the world into an eerie, sun-deprived twilight. And the architecture surrounding you, it looks like, an H.R. Geiger painting.
Right, that really unsettling biomechanical look.
Exactly. It's this landscape that feels like it's actively rejecting your presence. You take a few steps, you encounter a swarm of terrifying otherworldly creatures, and, well, despite your best efforts, you are brutally overwhelmed. You die.
Just completely crushed.
Right. But instead of a game over screen, your character gasps awake back at the landing zone, and they fully remember the agonizing death they just experienced, and they realize they have to do it all over again.
Which is such a brutal realization.
It really is. So today's deep dive is venturing into the cosmic nightmare of Saros, which is a highly anticipated new PS5 release from developer Housemarque. We're pulling from a fresh, really in-depth review of the game, and our mission today is to examine how this sci-fi third-person shooter takes the familiar, run-and-die structure of the roguelite and basically uses it to construct a massive cinematic horror narrative.
It is honestly a fascinating subversion of genre expectations.
Right.
Because when you boot up a traditional run-based game, you're generally accepting a very specific contract with the developers,
Right, like you're giving up one thing for another.
Exactly. You are trading narrative depth for mechanical replayability. Historically, studios working in this space, they prioritize highly randomized combat encounters and complex progression trees over storytelling.
Which, the logic makes sense, right?
It does. If a player is going to see the same corridor or the same boss 50 times, putting heavy emphasis on a linear story is often seen as a waste of resources.
Because the player will just skip the dialogue to get back into the action anyway.
Precisely.
Mm.
But Housemarque is deliberately breaching that contract here. They are taking a structure known for stripping away progress and pairing it with the kind of high-fidelity, meticulously crafted presentation you would normally expect from, like a slow-paced, interactive Hollywood blockbuster.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sensory whiplash of starting this game is something we really need to focus on. I was looking at the source review, and it highlights that the immediate impact of Saros isn't the combat.
Which is surprising for them.
Very.
Right.
Because if I'm sitting down to play a game with heavy bullet hell influences, I am mentally preparing myself to juggle mechanics. I expect the screen to immediately fill up with neon projectiles, forcing me to stretch my thumbs and just survive the arcade chaos.
Right, bracing for the storm.
Yeah. But the review explicitly notes that before the heavy combat even begins, you are hit with this overwhelming environmental atmosphere.
The visual and auditory design is just aggressively front and center. In fact, the reviewer uses the phrase cinema rivaling qualities to describe the graphics.
Cinema rivaling? Wow.
Yeah, which is a massive departure for a genre that usually relies on stylized aesthetics or pixel art to ease the burden of generating endless random levels.
That makes a lot of sense.
Saros doesn't present itself as a mere obstacle course. It presents itself as a living, breathing, profoundly oppressive world. And the sound design is thick and immersive, prioritizing ambient dread over, upbeat action tracks.
Which feels like a massive gamble for the developers. Putting AAA visual fidelity into a game where players are expected to sprint through levels on their 30th run seems counterintuitive.
It does seem that way at first glance.
But reading between the lines of the review, the presentation isn't just window dressing. It's actually a functional tool. By making the environment look that incredible and sound that oppressive, they are effectively trapping the player's attention.
Yes, exactly.
They are building an atmosphere so dense that you feel compelled to explore it, even when you know the genre's inherent mechanics are designed to aggressively push back against your progress.
And that is the core of their design philosophy here. The eye-popping visuals serve as the hook. Housemarque needs you to care about the world before they start punishing you with the combat.
Right, because if the world feels cheap,
then your deaths feel cheap and disposable too. By investing so heavily in a meticulously art-directed landscape, they elevate the stakes of every single run. You aren't just trying to beat a high score, you are trying to survive a tangible, hostile reality.
Yeah, and if a studio is going to spend that much time and energy crafting a stunning cinematic environment, they can't just populate it with generic lore. The narrative weight basically has to match the visual weight.
Absolutely.
And the world building we have here sounds incredibly compelling. So we are introduced to the protagonist, this elite soldier named Arjun Devraj, The source material makes a very specific point to praise the performance by actor Rahul Kohli.
Which is such a huge asset for the game.
It really is, and it tells me the developers understand the need for a grounded emotional anchor.
Well, having a strong central performance is vital when the gameplay loop is inherently repetitive. Arjun isn't a silent protagonist, right? He's not just a blank slate.
No, he's got a real personality and drive.
Exactly. He is a defined character with a specific mission. He's investigating the sudden disappearance of a mining colony on a remote, monster-infested planet.
Which, I mean, it begins as a relatively standard sci-fi trope, the lone soldier investigating a distress beacon, but the narrative quickly pivots into something much darker and, frankly, more psychological.
It does.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The pivot happens with what the review calls a sun-obscuring event. A planetary eclipse kicks in and fundamentally changes the reality of the game.
It just completely alters the tone.
Yeah, it takes a terrifying sci-fi rescue mission and plunges it into outright horror. The environment becomes this sanity-decaying, literal hellscape.
And the reviewer draws some very deliberate comparisons to frame the tone of this eclipse. They liken the atmosphere to classic films like Alien and The Thing, as well as, the unsettling biomechanical art of H.R. Geiger that we mentioned earlier.
Which is high praise.
Very high praise. And these references are incredibly informative, because when you invoke The Thing, you are talking about deep paranoid isolation.
Oh, for sure.
And when you invoke Geiger, you are talking about environments that blur the line between the organic and the mechanical. It creates spaces that feel fundamentally incompatible with human existence.
To build on that Geiger analogy, it's a difference between a simple jump scare and, deep environmental dread.
Right. Totally different feelings.
Because a monster jumping out of a vent is just a momentary spike in adrenaline. But an environment that looks like it's made of fossilized ribs and alien machinery where the architecture itself feels like it's watching you, that creates a sustained psychological deterioration.
Yes, it wears you down.
The planet itself becomes the primary antagonist. The eclipse isn't just a lighting change. It's a thematic statement that the player is completely cut off from the light of reason, basically plunged into a cosmic nightmare that actively wants to break Arjun's mind.
And that psychological deterioration is the engine of the game's horror. You are navigating a space that actively degrades human sanity. The monsters are almost a secondary threat compared to the oppressive, crushing weight of the isolation.
That's terrifying.
It is. And the cinematic presentation we discussed earlier pays off here, because you need those high-end visuals and the immersive soundscape to actually sell the suffocating nature of a sun-deprived world.
But, this brings up a massive friction point in the overall design. Let's look at this purely from a player's perspective for a second.
Okay.
In a traditional cinematic horror experience, the tension relies entirely on the permanence of the stakes. If the protagonist in a horror movie makes a terrible decision, they meet a gruesome end and the story concludes.
Roll credits.
Right. However, Saros is built on a structure where death is a prerequisite. The review makes it very clear that you will frequently meet your demise, lose the hard-earned ground you fought for, and find yourself dumped unceremoniously back at the starting line.
That is the defining hurdle of merging these two genres.
Right. And it forces a major question about immersion. I mean, if I'm deeply invested in Rahul Kohli's performance, and I genuinely care about unraveling the mystery of this mining colony, how does dying to a random barrage of energy blasts not completely shatter my engagement with the story?
It's a very fair question.
Because in most games, a death screen is an immersion breaker. It reminds you that you are just a person on a couch manipulating software. The reviewer even mentions that these types of games can easily devolve into just juggling systems and mechanics. So how does Saros avoid turning its narrative into a disjointed mess?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it avoids that trap by utilizing a design strategy Housemarque previously pioneered in their acclaimed title, Returnal.
Oh, what?
They take the genre's biggest liability, the repetitive, frustrating death cycle, and they literally weave it directly into the narrative fabric. The bullet hell death loop isn't a disconnected gameplay mechanic that exists outside of the story.
Wait.
It is the central mystery of the plot itself.
Oh, wow. So to use an analogy, we are looking at an edge of tomorrow or Groundhog Day scenario.
Exactly that.
When the player fails to dodge an attack and the screen goes black, the story isn't resetting to a previous save file. Arjun, the character, is actually experiencing the trauma of being obliterated and then waking up back at the starting zone, fully aware that he just died.
That is the crucial distinction. It creates a completely organic loop. Dying is no longer a failure state that pauses the narrative. dying is the catalyst for the next chapter of the narrative.
That's brilliant.
The source material emphasizes that whether you are investing in upgrades at your home base, exploring the sun-obscuring landscape, or getting absolutely crushed in a blistering boss battle, you are constantly progressing the sci-fi yarn.
I really love how that aligns the player's psychology with the protagonist's reality. Like, when I die after a grueling 40-minute run, the frustration and exhaustion I feel holding the controller is exactly the frustration and exhaustion Arjun is feeling in the story.
You're in it together.
We are sharing the trauma of the loop. It reframes the entire concept of a run. It's not just a mechanical attempt to reach a higher level. It is a desperate, canonical attempt to break free from a sanity-decaying nightmare.
And by contextualizing the game's mechanics within the lore, Housemarque ensures that every single action feels meaningful. The repetitive nature of the genre actually enhances the horror of the situation.
Because you remember it.
Right. The dread of having to face a monstrous entity again is amplified by the fact that the protagonist remembers the pain of the previous encounter. You are highly motivated to conquer the game because it is literally the only way to end the character's suffering.
But, while that narrative synthesis is brilliant on paper, we still have to confront the reality of the gameplay experience. Because just because a repetitive loop is justified by the plot, that doesn't mean playing through the same environments a dozen times isn't physically and mentally exhausting.
It definitely can be.
The review is very transparent about the difficulty, describing Saros as tough as nails and fully capable of repeatedly handing you your backside.
Oh yeah, it will punish you.
So, what does this all mean for the listener who might be a bit intimidated? If someone is turned off by that kind of brutal punishment, a clever story might not be enough to keep them from chucking their controller across the room. How do they avoid that frustration?
Well, the developers clearly anticipated that fatigue factor. They understood that a cinematic narrative is useless if the vast majority of players become too frustrated to ever actually see the conclusion.
Right, you want people to finish the story.
Exactly. So to address this, the review points out that Saros implements significant quality-of-life features that evolve the standard formula. It makes it far more accessible than many of its peers, deliberately targeting the tedium and the grind.
How exactly are they mitigating that grind? Because usually in these games, you start with nothing, you scavenge for temporary items, and if you die, you lose your entire inventory.
They mitigate it primarily through permanent upgrade paths. So while you will undoubtedly lose temporary buffs or specific weapons when you die, the time you spend in the loop is never entirely wasted.
Oh, that's a relief.
Your investments compound. You are continually building a permanent baseline of strength, basically fortifying Arjun's armor and arsenal against the cosmic horror. You feel noticeably more capable with each successive attempt.
Which, again, plays beautifully into the Edge of Tomorrow concept. It's not just about the player gaining muscle memory and learning enemy attack patterns. It's about the character retaining literal assets and physical enhancements across lifetimes.
Exactly.
But the review mentions a second accessibility feature that I find even more surprising. It says the game gives you the ability to skip completed areas.
Yeah. That is arguably the most significant paradigm shift in the game's design.
Let's analyze how that fundamentally changes the genre's mechanics. Because in a standard run-based game, the early levels serve as a mandatory farming phase.
You have to do them.
Right. Even if you've mastered the first biome, you still have to play through it every single time just to accumulate enough health and currency to survive the later, harder biomes. So if Saros lets you bypass the areas you've already beaten, how does it keep you from arriving at the next boss completely underleveled and helpless?
The permanent upgrade paths we just discussed are the mechanism that makes skipping viable. Because you are constantly elevating your baseline power, you don't need to rely solely on the temporary health drops or currency found in the early level.
Oh, I see.
Your permanent arsenal eventually reaches a point where it can handle the mid-game challenges right out of the gate. The game respects the player's time. It removes the obligation to slog through 30 minutes of easy encounters just to get another 2-minute attempt at the difficult boss that previously defeated you.
The psychological relief of that feature just cannot be overstated. The dread of the grind is usually what causes players to abandon these games. If I know I can jump straight back to the front line of my progression, my willingness to experiment and take risks skyrockets.
You aren't penalized for trying something new.
Right. I am no longer playing scared. I can focus my cognitive energy entirely on the combat in front of me, rather than worrying about the hour of progress I might lose.
And by stripping away that tedious obligatory replayability, the developers channel the player's focus directly into what the review calls enemy-obliterating flow state shooting.
Flow state is such a vital concept for a game like this. It's that precise psychological zone where the complexity of the mechanics basically fades into the background.
Yes, you stop overthinking it.
You are no longer consciously thinking about which button triggers the dash or how to manage your reload timing. Your thumbs just instinctively dance through the barrage of enemy fire. It's a hypnotic rhythm.
And achieving that flow state is much easier when the game isn't actively annoying you with busywork. By allowing players to skip conquered territory, Saros provides a streamlined path to its most rewarding encounters.
Which is great for newcomers?
It is. The review notes this makes it a fantastic entry point for players who are new to the genre who might have previously avoided these games due to their reputation for progress-stripping punishment.
At the same time, the source material clarifies that the hardcore audience hasn't been left behind. The core combat is still intensely demanding. It is not for the faint-hearted.
Oh, definitely not.
It seems Housemarque hasn't compromised the game's actual difficulty. They have simply engineered the frustration out of the progression system. They've isolated the purest, most enjoyable elements of arcade shooting and wrapped them in a top-tier cinematic presentation.
It really demonstrates that the boundaries between video game genres are far more flexible than we often assume. The mechanical depth of a punishing shooter can absolutely coexist with the immersive storytelling of a blockbuster adventure, provided the developers are willing to thoughtfully integrate the two.
They just have to put in the work.
Right. Saros manages to make the cycle of death feel like a rewarding narrative journey rather than an arbitrary mechanical punishment.
It's a remarkable achievement in game design. We set out today to understand how this PS5 title turns a notoriously brutal genre upside down, and the answer really lies in its deep respect for the player's experience.
I agree completely.
By using the death loop as a narrative engine to drive a compelling mystery, and heavily investing in a sanity-decaying atmosphere, and providing the quality-of-life tools necessary to skip the grind, it offers a terrifying but deeply respectful challenge. You get the thrill of the flow state without the exhaustion of the repetition.
It is an incredibly elegant solution to a decades-old design problem. However, if we examine the lore they've built to justify these mechanics, we are left with a rather unsettling implication regarding our protagonist's ultimate fate.
Oh, I have a feeling the cosmic horror goes a bit deeper than just the Geiger aesthetics. What are we missing here?
Well, we need to consider the true cost of the permanent upgrade loop. We know that Arjun's resurrections are canonical. He retains the memories of every blistering battle, every agonizing death, and the terrifying isolation of the sun-obscuring eclipse.
Right.
We also know that his physical armor and weaponry permanently improve across these cycles. He becomes an increasingly unstoppable force. But there is a glaring question of psychological attrition.
Wait, because the human mind is not designed to process an endless cycle of violent deaths.
Precisely. If his physical capabilities are permanently upgrading, is his mental state permanently degrading?
Oh, wow.
The quality of life features that make the game enjoyable for us, the mechanics that allow us to skip levels and easily obliterate enemies, they might actually be masking a horrifying reality for Arjun. The more efficiently he kills, the less human he becomes.
That is incredibly dark.
It forces the player to consider whether they are actually guiding a hero towards salvation, or if they are simply piloting a man who is adapting to his own personalized, inescapable cosmic purgatory.
That casts the entire flow state into a completely different light. The better we get at the game, the more we are basically institutionalizing Arjun into the nightmare. The efficiency isn't a triumph. It's a symptom of his decaying humanity.
Exactly.
That is an incredibly brilliant, though depressing, way to think about the mastery of the game's systems. It transforms a mechanical victory into a narrative tragedy. Well, thank you for walking through this massive shift in game design with us today.
It was my pleasure.
To everyone listening, it's a perfect reminder to look closer at the mechanics beneath the story and the story hiding within the mechanics. Until our next deep dive, keep questioning the worlds you explore, and we'll catch you next time.